The winter wind swept through the narrow streets of the small town of Maplewood, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of snow. The houses were dressed in twinkling lights, each one glowing like a tiny lantern in the darkness. Families were tucked inside, laughter spilling out from behind closed doors, the kind of laughter that comes with warmth and safety. But at the end of Willow Lane, in a small, weather-worn house with a sagging roof and creaking steps, there was only silence. Inside that house lived a woman named Clara. She was in her late 50s, her hair more silver than brown now, her hands lined and calloused from years of work that never seemed to end. Once, her home had been full of noise, the chatter of children, the hum of a husband's low voice, the smell of bread baking in the oven. But life has a way of changing things without asking permission. Her husband had passed away 5 winters ago, and her only daughter, Lily, had moved to the city for a job that barely kept her afloat. Clara didn't blame her. She wanted her daughter to have a better life, one where bills didn't decide how much food you could afford or whether you could turn the heat on at night. Still, the quiet was heavy. It was the kind of silence that settled deep in the walls and made a person feel smaller. That year had been especially hard. Clara's arthritis had worsened, and she could no longer work at the bakery as she used to. Her savings were nearly gone. The power bill sat unpaid on the table beside a half-empty jar of instant coffee. Every morning she woke up, pulled on her old sweater, and told herself she would be fine. She always said it out loud, "I'll be fine, just like always." But lately, even she didn't believe it. It was a few days before Christmas when the first snow fell, soft and steady, blanketing the town in white. Clara stood by the window, watching it gather on the railing. She wished she could buy a small gift for Lily or even send her something to remind her of home, but there was nothing left to send. The thought stung more than the cold. That evening, as she sipped the last bit of her coffee, she heard a faint sound at the door, a light thud, like something had been dropped. She frowned and set down her cup. Visitors were rare, she hadn't seen anyone in weeks. Pulling her cardigan tighter, she opened the door and peered outside. The snow was falling harder now, and for a moment she saw nothing but white. Then she looked down. There, on the top step, was a small brown box tied with a piece of red string. No name, no address, just a simple tag that read, "For you." Clara hesitated. She glanced up and down the street, but no one was there. The snow-covered road was empty, the streetlights glowing softly in the mist. With trembling hands, she picked up the box and took it inside. The box was surprisingly light. She set it on the kitchen table, untied the string, and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a few small items wrapped in tissue. She opened the note first. It read, "Sometimes the smallest kindness can carry someone through the coldest winter. You are not forgotten. Merry Christmas." There was no signature, no hint of who had written it. Clara's throat tightened. Beneath the note lay a loaf of fresh bread, still warm, a small jar of jam, a pair of knitted gloves, and an envelope containing $50. For a long time, Clara just stood there, staring. It felt like her heart didn't know whether to break or to mend. She pressed the gloves to her face. They smelled faintly of lavender soap, as if they had been made by someone's caring hands. Tears welled up, but they weren't the bitter kind. They were soft, almost peaceful. Someone had thought of her. Someone had remembered. That night, for the first time in months, Clara ate a full meal. She sliced the bread slowly, savoring every bite, the jam sweet and bright on her tongue. She didn't turn on the television or the radio. She didn't need noise. The silence, for once, felt kind. The next morning, she woke up early and looked out the window again. The snow had stopped, and the world looked new, clean and quiet. She thought about the box on her table, about how a small act had lit something in her chest she thought had long gone out. She couldn't stop wondering who it had been. The town wasn't large, maybe one of the neighbors down the lane, or someone from the bakery who'd noticed her absence. But whoever it was, they had given her more than food or money. They had given her hope. That afternoon, Clara decided to bake again. Her hands hurt, but she moved slowly and carefully, mixing the dough, kneading it, letting it rise. The smell filled the house, bringing back memories of better times. When the bread was done, she wrapped it in a clean towel, slipped a note underneath, and stepped out into the cold. She didn't have much to give, but she knew someone else might need a reminder that they, too, weren't forgotten. She walked 2 streets down to where an older man named Mr. Jenkins lived. He was a widower too, often sitting by his porch with his old dog, both of them looking tired. She left the loaf at his doorstep, along with the note that said simply, "Kindness travels best when it's shared." Then she quietly walked back home before anyone could see her. The next morning, there was a knock on her door. When she opened it, Mr. Jenkins stood there, holding the towel-wrapped bread. His eyes were misty. "I don't know how you knew," he said, his voice trembling, "but this meant more than you can imagine." Clara smiled softly. "Someone left a gift on my doorstep yesterday," she said. "I thought maybe it was meant to be passed along." Mr. Jenkins nodded, understanding more than words could say. "Then I'll make sure it keeps moving," he said quietly. And so it began. Over the next few weeks, the people of Willow Lane began finding small gifts at their doors, a basket of fruit, a scarf, a few homemade cookies. Each one came with the same note, "Kindness travels best when it's shared." No one knew where it started. Some thought it was the church, others guessed it was the bakery, but the truth was simpler. It was a quiet chain reaction, one person touched by a kindness too beautiful to keep to themselves. When Lily came home for New Year's, she noticed something different about her mother. Clara's eyes seemed brighter, her laughter easier. The house was still small, still old, but it felt alive again. That evening, as they sat by the small fire, Lily asked, "Mom, who's been leaving those gifts everyone's talking about?" Clara smiled and looked into the flames. "I don't really know," she said softly. "But maybe that's the magic of it, not knowing who, just knowing someone cared." Lily squeezed her hand. "That's beautiful," she said. The truth, though, lingered quietly in Clara's heart. She knew how it had started, with the mysterious box left on her doorstep. She still didn't know who had placed it there, but sometimes she imagined it was someone who understood loneliness the way she once had. Maybe it was a young mother down the street, or a stranger passing through, or even one of those children who used to wave at her window. Whoever it was, they had started something that reached farther than they could have known. As the months went by, the spirit of those doorstep gifts grew. People began leaving things not just at neighbors' doors, but at the community center, the small hospital, even at the old bus stop where travelers often waited in the cold. Each gift carried warmth, not the kind that came from blankets or food, but the kind that came from being seen, being remembered. One afternoon in spring, Clara received another small box at her door. This one was wrapped in floral paper, with a note tucked beneath the ribbon. Her heart skipped when she unfolded it. "Thank you for keeping the kindness alive. You were never forgotten, Clara. You reminded us all how love finds its way back home." It wasn't signed. But this time, she didn't wonder who it was. She simply smiled, touched the words gently, and whispered, "Thank you." From that day forward, she made it a quiet mission to keep the chain going. Whenever she baked, she made an extra loaf. Whenever she knitted, she made an extra pair of gloves. She didn't have much, but what she gave came from her heart, and that seemed to make all the difference. Years later, long after Clara had grown frail and her hands could no longer knead dough, the people of Maplewood still carried on the tradition. Every winter, small gifts appeared on doorsteps all over town, wrapped in simple paper and tied with red string. Children grew up hearing stories of the gift left at the doorstep, the one that began a wave of kindness during the coldest season of the year. No one knew exactly how it started, but everyone knew what it meant. It meant that even when the world feels cold and quiet, kindness has a way of finding its way through the cracks. It meant that sometimes, the smallest act, a loaf of bread, a pair of gloves, a note, could ripple farther than anyone could imagine. And on those snowy nights, when the world seemed still and the streets shimmered under the glow of the streetlights, someone, somewhere, would whisper into the silence, "Thank you, for the gift left at the doorstep."